The race fields look harmless from a hilltop, an endless quilt of green stitched with water and wind. From afar, they are beautiful, neat rows, gleaming mirrors of sky, the slow, patient labor of generations. Up close, they are another world entirely. For the men who stepped into them in the long years of the Vietnam War, those fields were not scenery. They were a climate, a geography, a mindset. And, more dangerously than any single enemy unit, they were a weapon. Imagine walking into a painting that hates you. Each step sinks, your boots collect water, your socks thicken with mud until your feet feel like foreign things attached to your legs. Your uniform is heavy, soaked through, the fabric clinging to your skin. Insects cling, leeches find warm flesh, and every breath tastes faintly of rot. There is a weight to the air here that nothing in the textbooks prepared you for. A bone-deep humidity that wears the edges off your thoughts and turns time into a slow, grinding ache. The sun is a hard coin overhead, or it is gone behind a swell of monsoon, and the world is a waterlogged twilight. Either way, the ground refuses to cooperate. Tanks bog down, vehicles falter, tracks leave ghostly trails that speak only to the next patrol.
You learn small truths fast. Your radio will catch static when it rains. Your rifle will feel heavier after hours standing in water. Your boots will never dry. Your rations will soften and sour. Infection is not a rumor. It is insomnia and greed, and the way a man's foot begins to burn in his sleep. Men call it jungle rot. It doesn't sound like a thing that could end a man, but it does. It kills discipline, morale, precision. It eats at your edges until mistakes become inevitable. But the land's cruelty is not only physical. It complicates sight and sound in ways that favor a certain kind of fighter. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army knew this country not as a map, but as a set of behaviors. They could move through the paddies with a patience that felt, to Americans, like arrogance. They wore no uniforms the way city soldiers do. They wore woven hats and plain clothes, carried baskets and water buffalo. They looked like farmers. They could be indistinguishable from neighbors. The farmers were the fields, and the fields were the army. The most terrifying thing to an outsider was the suddenness with which danger could appear and disappear. One heartbeat, you are alone, the shimmering green dissolving into a mirage. The next, a volley erupts, a shotgun crack, a burst, the wet slap of a grenade. You see no muzzle flash. You see the rice bend and then straighten. You see only ripples on water and the bright realization that a man beside you is gone. The attackers were not always nearby. Sometimes they pulled a string, and a trap did the work. An anti-personnel mine concealed under a floating mat of plants. A sharpened bamboo stake hidden below the waterline. A tripwire rigged between two stalks that transforms a field into an instrument of death.
Search and destroy missions became the American mantra. They were meant to deny the enemy safe havens, to break supply lines, to purge the countryside. But the paddies were patient. They ate footprints, closed over trenches and shell craters, neutralized smoke markers, and rewrote geography every rainy season. Americans could burn the rice. The next year the soil would bloom again, indifferent. You could drop thousands of pounds of explosives from a hovering bird, and the next monsoon would fill the holes and smooth the field until it looked untouched. The war required permanence. The land offered only renewal. There are stories that sound unreal until you imagine them in slow motion. A small patrol wades into a narrow canal just after dawn, the mist a shawl around their helmets. They move by instinct, scanning tree lines and canal banks, expecting to see signs, footprints, discarded rags, fresh cuts of grass. Nothing. Then, on the far bank, an old man with a plow, indifferent. He meets their eyes and keeps walking. The patrol relaxes.
They continue. 17 meters later, a scream, then a pause, then the sickening sound of someone collapsing in water. A grenade has been catapulted from a hidden canal, returning a moment later as an echo. No one ever saw the thrower. No one easily traced the attack back to a face.
Psychology became a battlefield as much as geography. The fear that accumulates in silence is like rust on the will. Men whose training tells them that they can always see the enemy must unlearn that certainty. You begin to suspect everything: the chirping of a frog, the rustle of rice, the hollow echo of a shell on water. Sleep becomes an impossible science. In the dark, you attach a bayonet to your rifle. You pull the poncho tight and listen to the rain. Think. Around the fire, men crack jokes that are brittle, because humor is a shield thinner than the cloth of their uniforms. They trade stories, some of heroism, some of near misses. They trade the names of boys back home like talismans. It is a human attempt to remind themselves there is a world beyond the mud. And yet there are moments, brief and disorienting, when the land seems almost benign. An ordinary landscape of tending and harvest, of children crossing footbridges, of a water buffalo plodding through knee-deep water. Those moments make the danger worse, because they are reminders that the people here are living, breathing, and not all enemies. The Viet Cong often lived among them. They used tunnels and false floors, hidden wells, and the secrecy of the night. Villages harbor both the tools of agriculture and the tools of war. A crate of rice and a stockpile of weapons can be indistinguishable until someone opens the lid. American forces adapted in several ways: patrol boats on canals, sweeps with engineers, increased reliance on air mobility. Helicopters became icons of hope and terror, a whirring savior that could drop men where they were needed, and yet also an object of vulnerability when it thudded into a swamp. The rotor wash could obscure a camp, lift a scent, break the surface of the water into a blur, perfect for cover and for havoc. But helicopters could not be everywhere. They could not teach men to see through the ripple of water or to hear danger beneath the croak of a frog.
And then there was the terrible arithmetic of attrition. Every mission in the paddies exacted a toll of time, supplies, and human resilience. For each village cleared, there were 10 others to check. For every cache found, many more remained hidden. The enemy did not need to win decisive battles to win strategically. He merely needed to make the cost of engagement intolerable. You could measure this in numbers, casualties, equipment lost, but numbers do not capture the insidious erosion of will that comes from being hunted by a landscape and a foe that mirror each other's patience. The fieldcraft of the Viet Cong was low-tech and brilliant. Clay figurines and food caches marked trails. Rope and bamboo functioned as alarms. A dead branch, moved, meant someone had been there. The simplest devices, spikes, pits, sharpened bamboo called punji stakes, could inflict maximum damage with minimal material. They were cruelty upon necessity, an efficient way to turn an ordinary field into a hazard. The Americans countered with metal detectors, flamethrowers, and engineers who probed the mortar with long poles. Sometimes it worked. Often it did not. The rain came, the ground rearranged itself, and the enemy retreated, not in panic, but with a practiced patience, knowing well that time was on his side.
It is important to remember the human faces in these stories. For every tactical description, there are stories of individuals. A squad leader who waded into a canal to pull a man clear of mud. A medic who refused to leave a crumpled soldier under a smattering of fire. A young private who learned to tell the difference between a frog's call and the hiss of a tightening tripwire. There are stories of courage that feel almost ordinary when set against the panorama of horror. Men who shared their last canteen, who held a flaring limb until the pain faded into nothing, who read letters from home over and over as if hearing a voice could stitch them back together. The paddies took men in ways that often left no tidy ending. Sometimes the only record was a small plaque back home, or the memory of a single friend who survived.
The war also had its shadows of moral ambiguity. Search and destroy operations blurred into punitive expeditions. The line between combatant and civilian could be thin, sometimes non-existent. Whole communities were uprooted. Rice that fed families one season more often fed armies the next. The ecological damage was not only to acres, but to generations. The chemicals dropped, the scars in the earth, the social fractures left by suspicion and loss. Civilian suffering compounded soldier suffering until any claim of a clean line between right and wrong became hard to maintain. By the time the fighting ebbed and the Americans withdrew, the paddies remained. They continued to rise and fall with the monsoon, to be planted and harvested, to host both everyday life and inconvenient history. For the veterans who returned, the fields did not heal in the same time as the land did. The sight of a flooded rice paddy could pull a memory like a fish hook through the mind, the splash of a boot, the short-lived certainty of an approaching friend, the sudden absence. Some men never spoke of it. Others made art or wrote small notebooks of names. Many drank or found ways to live around the silence. So when you look at a photograph of Vietnam's rice paddies, or when you pass a field on a travel documentary, remember that beauty might be layered over tragedy. Remember that a landscape can hold both hardest and ambush, both lullaby and alarm. Remember, too, that for those who stood in that water, the war was not only about enemy lines or political arguments. It was about a stubborn, indifferent land that took on the role of an adversary and taught a brutal lesson, that not all wars are decided by firepower or plans. Some are decided by patience, by knowing where to wait, by letting the earth and rain do their slow work.